Tanner Brooks woke up to find his property line secretly moved, 2 feet of his land quietly stolen by a smug HOA president named Bryce, armed with fake maps and real arrogance. While the neighborhood stayed silent, Bryce tried to bury him in legal jargon and bluff. But Tanner had a surveyor in the family and a notarized report that turned the whole scheme on its head. Just wait till you see how the truth knocked down the HOA's power grab and cast a long shadow, literally. Tanner Brooks had lived quietly on his slice of Oregon soil for nearly 2 decades. His home, sturdy, unpretentious, and built with his own hands alongside his father's, sat nestled beneath a line of Douglas firs, where the air smelled like pine and wood smoke, even in the summer. The half-acre lot wasn't grand, but it was his. Every inch of it had been measured, walked, and documented back in 1986, when his father, a retired county engineer, hammered steel boundary pins into the earth and logged them with the county registrar himself. For Tanner, those pins weren't just property markers. They were family history set in iron. That's why, on a foggy Thursday morning in early May, something felt immediately wrong the moment he stepped onto his front porch with a cup of coffee. The ground looked disturbed. His eyes narrowed at the tracks, thick tire impressions cutting across the dew-covered lawn, arcing around his side yard like someone had been working under cover of night. He followed them slowly, barefoot, heart thudding. That's when he saw the pink. Where the steel pin had been, always right at the edge of his cedar planter box, now stood a bright pink flag tied to a PVC stake, wobbling slightly in the breeze. Another stood 10 paces down, and another beyond that, forming a faint but unmistakable line. A line that cut 2 full feet into what he knew, without a shred of doubt, was his land. He bent down, brushed the wet grass aside, and found nothing. No trace of the original marker, just fresh, upturned soil. Still trying to make sense of it, Tanner turned back toward his porch, and that's when he saw the paper taped to his door. A single sheet, printed in black and white and tucked inside a sheet protector. It read, "Notice, Boundary Adjustment. Implemented by HOA Authority, Lot Realignment Initiative Phase 2. Based on recent aerial alignment studies and topographic modeling, your property line has been adjusted to reflect regional mapping consistency. The change is effective immediately." It wasn't signed, no phone number, no letterhead, just a printed seal from the newly formed Pine Bluff Community Oversight Board, a name Tanner had only heard once in passing. He felt the first wave of unease settle into something heavier. Just last month, at the edge of his neighborhood, a newer development, Pine Bluff Estates, had voted to expand its jurisdictional footprint by a slim majority. 4 adjacent lots, including his, were reportedly eligible for annexation due to infrastructure overlap. The language had sounded vague, almost theoretical. Tanner hadn't signed anything. No one had knocked on his door. Yet, here it was, an anonymous notice claiming not only governance over his home, but the authority to move his land's legal boundaries without so much as a phone call. He stared at the pink flags again, now a jagged little army, staking claim to land his father once measured by hand. Something wasn't right, and he knew deep down that this wasn't going to be fixed with a neighborly chat. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a quiet invasion. The community meeting was held in the Pine Bluff Clubhouse, a beige, stuccoed building with spotless hedges, laminated flyers on the windows, and a projector screen perpetually stuck on the HOA's mission statement. Tanner arrived early, wearing his work boots and a flannel that still smelled faintly of motor oil. He brought with him a folder of documents, copies of his deed, the original boundary survey his father had filed, and photographs of the stolen marker site. He wasn't there to cause a scene. He just wanted answers. The room slowly filled with homeowners, most of them from Pine Bluff proper, folks who'd bought into the HOA dream of uniform mailboxes, quarterly brunches, and visual harmony. Tanner stood out immediately. He was one of the old residents, a legacy property owner, as they called it, though the way they said it, it felt more like a blemish than a badge. At 7:05 sharp, Bryce Halderman entered, clipboard in hand and smugness in stride. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, no tie, and loafers that hadn't touched unpaved earth in years. Bryce had the confident tone of someone who used to hand out fines for overgrown hedges, and now thought of himself as a neighborhood statesman. His background as a former code enforcement officer gave him a practiced air of authority, and his real estate connections meant he talked fast and waved around documents like gospel. When the floor opened for public comment, Tanner stood and cleared his throat. "My name is Tanner Brooks. I live on Willow Lane. My property was just annexed under this so-called jurisdiction, and last week someone removed my boundary markers and placed new ones, 2 feet into my land." He held up a photo of the pink flags. "I didn't authorize it. I didn't agree to be part of this HOA, and I sure didn't give permission for my property lines to be redrawn." A ripple moved through the room, murmurs, and turned heads. Bryce remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, then rose, adjusted his cuffs, and walked slowly to the front. "Mr. Brooks," he said with a rehearsed half-smile, "we appreciate your participation in the community process, but I assure you this adjustment is the result of correcting a long-standing mapping error, one which predates your ownership. According to our aerial overlays and topographic data, the real line falls where the new flags are." Tanner blinked. "That's not what my deed says, and it's not what the county survey shows." Bryce shrugged, still smiling. "We're operating off the most current GIS data available through regional planning. This isn't about personal feelings. It's about aligning with proper documentation." The room grew quiet. Tanner held his ground. "And this documentation, can I see it?" Bryce motioned to his assistant, who produced a single sheet of paper. It was a black and white photocopy of a county GIS map, the kind anyone could download from a decade-old planning website. The lines were blurry. The parcels weren't labeled. The date in the bottom corner read 2013. Tanner stared at it, incredulous. "This is 12 years out of date." Bryce didn't flinch. "It's sufficient for administrative purposes, and as of last month, the revised charter of Pine Bluff Estates grants oversight to include shared green frontage areas for continuity. That includes sections of your northern boundary, which, as you know, hosts a number of non-permitted structures. That non-permitted structure was Tanner's tool shed, hand-built, solid, and entirely on his father's land since the 1980s. The shared green frontage was the edge of his own lawn, where he parked his fishing boat. According to Bryce, those were now part of HOA-regulated common space. Tanner felt his hands tighten around the folder. He wasn't yelling. He didn't have to. The fury in his chest was a cold, sharp thing, like a blade slowly twisting. This wasn't bureaucracy. This was theft dressed in policy, arrogance packaged as procedure. No one else in the room came to his defense. Not one neighbor spoke up. Bryce thanked him for his comment and moved on to the next agenda item, spring shrub standardization compliance. And Tanner sat down, folder still clenched, teeth grinding. They had stolen 2 feet of his land. But more than that, they acted like they'd always owned it. Tanner didn't sleep much that night after the community meeting. He sat at his kitchen table long past midnight, staring at the faded GIS printout Bryce had handed him, his father's original survey map beside it. One was flimsy, the other permanent. One was guesswork, the other law. He didn't raise his voice at the meeting. But now, that silent, contained anger had hardened into something colder and sharper. He knew one thing for certain. He needed facts. Not speculation, not vague HOA jargon, real, certified, government-backed proof. So he picked up the phone. Neil Carson, his niece's husband, was a licensed land surveyor with a reputation for being precise to the point of obsession. Years ago, Tanner had helped Neil frame out his workshop for free. 8 weekends of hauling lumber and setting joists, and Neil had always said he owed him one. Now, Tanner was calling in that favor. By Monday, Neil's survey crew rolled up in 2 pickup trucks, trailer in tow, their equipment gleaming in the morning sun like something out of a tech catalog. They unloaded total stations, GPS base units, tripods, and reference maps straight from county records. Neil didn't waste time with talk. He got right to work. For 2 days, they mapped every corner, measured every line, and cross-referenced every recorded pin and deed marker dating back to 1986. Neil even pulled archived plats from the county's deep storage and overlaid them with current GPS data, accurate to the centimeter. The results were brutal in their clarity. The new pink HOA stakes were 2.3 feet inside Tanner's legal boundary. On paper, in practice, and by every technical standard that mattered. More damning, the land in question wasn't some unclaimed stretch of grass. It cut directly across the northwest corner of Tanner's lot, bisecting the concrete slab he'd poured for his fishing boat and clipping into the rear of his tool shed. According to the legal property line filed with the county, the HOA's adjustment wasn't a clerical update, it was trespass. And worse, it suggested that someone from Pine Bluff's leadership had knowingly submitted altered documents to justify their land grab during their expansion filing. Neil's final report was stamped, notarized, and bound in a sealed packet, complete with full-resolution diagrams, photos, and GPS overlays. He even included a sworn statement for the county. No known historical mapping error exists. The 1986 recorded deed lines remain legally binding and have not shifted. Encroachment observed and documented. Tanner didn't wait. First thing the next morning, he walked into the county assessor's office with Neil's report under his arm. The clerk's eyes widened by page 4. By the time they reached the part about possible false filings, she excused herself to get the deputy assessor. By Friday, everything had escalated. The HOA received a formal cease and desist order, along with a notice to appear before the County Land Commission. The commission's language was exact: unauthorized land alteration, non-compliant jurisdictional expansion, and potential misrepresentation of boundary documentation. In legal terms, that meant they were one hearing away from a full audit and a potential fraud referral to the county attorney. Bryce Halderman didn't go quiet. He doubled down. He sent out letters to residents insisting the HOA had acted in good faith and claimed the dispute was a misunderstanding caused by incomplete legacy records. But when the county sent a second letter, this time copied to the State Real Estate Board, Bryce's tone changed. Gone was the smugness. Gone was the legal bluffing. Because now, the rules weren't his to manipulate, and the county was watching. The silence from the Pine Bluff HOA didn't last long. Just days after the cease and desist landed, Tanner received a certified letter. Not another notice, not a demand, but an offer. It was formal, almost apologetic in tone, but buried in the legal phrasing was something that said more than any apology ever could. They were surrendering. The HOA proposed a cash settlement for the exact 2-foot strip of land they had encroached upon. Not only were they offering to buy the narrow sliver, just 48 inches wide and running the length of Tanner's western boundary, but they were also including backdated use compensation for the portion of his shed and boat pad they'd wrongly claimed. Added on top were fines issued by the county itself for unauthorized land adjustment filings. Tanner read through the documents slowly, his thumb resting on the signature line. He wasn't in it for the money, but the principle? That mattered. So he signed, and when the check cleared, he knew exactly what he'd do with every last cent. He called a local stonemason named Edgar, who specialized in boundary and memorial installations. Together, they planned a low, solid wall made from local basalt, rugged, clean-cut, and built to last generations. It ran along the precise legal line of his property, anchored with deep concrete footings, reinforced with rebar, and built to county code. It wasn't just a wall, it was a monument. Set into its face were 2 custom-etched brass plaques. One bore the original parcel number and deed coordinates from 1986, the numbers crisp and defiant. The other read, "In memory of Thomas Brooks, who measured this land by hand and passed it down with honor. Let no one move these stones again." People in the neighborhood began to whisper about the wall, the lawsuit, and what really happened behind closed HOA meetings. By the end of the month, Bryce Halderman resigned. Officially, he cited personal obligations, But those who'd watched the hearings knew better. The county's land commission had launched a full audit of Pine Bluff's expansion practices, and word had spread that they were now reviewing every boundary adjustment the HOA had approved in the past 5 years. What had started as a power grab ended with the entire organization under scrutiny. And as for that wall, Tanner hadn't built it tall, just high enough to make a point. But it was positioned with quiet precision. Each morning, the rising sun cast a long shadow over Bryce's former backyard, specifically across the new flower garden he had planted just weeks before the boundary dispute began. The petunias never did get enough light after that. The message wasn't loud. It was firm, unmoving, and unmistakable. This land is mine, and it always was.